Okay, so the purpose of this video is to show you how to create, or the steps required to create a chart that's driven by spreadsheet type data in Illustrator. I've drawn in these little hills afterwards, so that's not actually part of it. So I can't repeat exactly what I did in class, and that's not the expectations, but I'm just going to show you the steps. So your first step is to get some data, and this all depends on the data that you're doing and the chart that you're going to do. There are like 7 different ways to do this. So here's time in this column and home sales in this column. And I've put this in quotes so that it doesn't read it as data, it reads it as text. So I'm going to copy that from my spreadsheet or whatever I have it. I'm going to go over here to the column graph tool. I'm going to click and spread. Click and drag. I let go. I come up here and I paste that data in there. And then I hit click, and then we've got our data. Okay, so that data looks really boring, and you can do a bunch of things to it. So that's step 1. Step 2 is to take your icon or whatever graphic you've made. In this case, I've made a house. Create your icon. That's what you're going to spend the most time on, or what the fun part is of this assignment. And you're going to take that. Now, for the purpose of this, I'm just going to take and make a box. So let's just pretend that that's my icon. I'm going to drag it over here into symbols. And as I drag it over, I'm going to give it a name, and there's 2 choices, and you're going to make it a dynamic symbol, and I'll explain that in a minute. But we want it to be dynamic because then we can mess with the colors afterwards. If we do a static symbol, then you can't do anything with it. It's set in stone. So I'm going to hit OK, and now it's in there. Now, for now, I'm going to pull out my real symbol. So I'm going to pull that out like that. Let's delete that one. And I'll show you why this is dynamic, because I can grab 2 different ones here. And now I can actually click on this with the direct selection tool, and I can change the color of the roof, let's say. And you may want to do that, you may not. There were some examples that use that. We can do that after the fact. But anyway, so now we have our symbol, and it's a dynamic symbol. All right, so that's the next step. So now we've got our data in, and we've got our symbol ready. All right, so the next step is to select with the selection tool your symbol, and go to Object, Graph, Design, and you'll notice that it's in here, and you'll say New Design, rename, and I'll call it House 2. So now we've got our house in a design that will work and be inserted into the graphs. And the final step, or kind of the final step, is to select your graph, the whole thing, with the selection tool, not with the direct selection tool. Right click on it with control click. And now I want to apply that design to the column. So I'm going to go like that. And there's house 2. It shows it to me. Now I've got a bunch of different versions here that I can choose, and you're going to have to decide which is best for your particular project. It also depends on the type of chart that you're using or creating. So I'm going to do repeating. Then you have to decide how many units. So let me watch this. So if I do, let's say I'm at about 200. If I say 100 units for each 100 units are represented by each house or each icon, it's going to look like that. Okay? Or I might do, wish there was a preview on this. I might do, again, I got a house, vertically scaled, repeating. If I say 4 units, I'm going to chop the end. I didn't have it selected, sorry. Oh, there they go. And that's too small. Those are little houses there, you can't see them. So you have to kind of decide like what your, go back here to column. You got to decide like what the best look is for your, let's say 40. And then that has a lot of space. Depends on what you want. But that's what you got to do. And again, you're going to have to experiment with all the different variables. I'm not going to show each of them to you, but if I go back to column, there's what it actually does, okay, and then how it treats the ending, which that's what this is, and then in other words your fraction. So here's a fraction and it tells it to chop. Sometimes it'll make it smaller, and it just depends on what story you're trying to tell. So that's what you're going to have to figure out. And then the other tips I would give you are to use the direct selection tool and reduce the noise. Again, it depends on what you're doing. Reduce the noise on this by reducing the size, maybe changing the font. Maybe you get rid of this completely, I don't know. Then you're going to export that as a JPEG or a PDF, and then you're going to open up an InDesign file probably. It's probably going to be easier to finish it in InDesign. And then in InDesign you can do the headline, the data information, and then whatever else you're going to do. So this was an example where it took it and it made it larger. It didn't repeat it. It scaled it vertically, and it happened to work. So that's a different way. This this one scaled it as well. This one scaled it. This one repeated it with the fractions chopped. This one scaled it. This one, they changed the color after the fact, right? Because it's a dynamic symbol. And repeated, and I'm told those of you who are in class, this student put the bun at the bottom, and he actually had to put these buns behind right through here because it doesn't squish them together perfectly the way it works, and then he put the buns on top. But you can do all kinds of things to it afterwards as long as this data is created with an icon in that spreadsheet. I don't care what you do. So this shows you how close they actually are. So it worked okay with the ice cream. So, and then that student covered up this with something else. So, and the rest are in the instructions as far as what else you want to do. But so that's the steps. Thank you for your patience.